Did you ever get an answer from Tantra out of whether or not we should be recording this as well? I guess I'll go ahead and record it. Safe side.
Well, welcome everyone. Uh, I am Liz Geyer and I am a collaborator with CreateAWorld, and I have Janice Cornetti with me this morning. And CreateAWorld, for those of you who haven't seen us before, is a group of collaborators that come on and have discussions with each other on what we're present to in the world. And each of the collaborators comes from very different aspects in life. We tend to different areas on the planet, and but we come together uh, as a group that also operates in the field of Tantramat, and we operate under some principles, some beautiful principles. Among them are that everything is part of everything else, that everything operates on behalf of everything else, that everything is in relationship with everything else, that everything has a place. That principle is my favorite, and that everything is always moving to the next greater whole. And when Janice and I met a little earlier in the week, I had had some moments in my day where it seemed like no matter which pathway I went down, um, there was unworkability. And usually I can just kind of say, okay, I know I'm not supposed to go down that path, and I'm usually pretty calm about it. And by going down a path, I mean that, there's some situation that happens in life, and there's some not for life aspect to it. So, uh, as an example, to begin my day, I was tutoring a middle schooler early in the day, very early, and this middle schooler was really struggling. Um, she struggles in almost every subject, and was just having a moment that day where nothing was working for her. And so trying to reset us and pull us out of that to really to become productive, and how could we become productive, just did not happen the whole hour. It was like hitting up against firewalls the whole hour. And then after that tutoring session, there was another situation that was very similar, just coming up against these walls. And I sat back and I reflected, and I thought, okay, well, here's where one of my words for the year, tenacity, comes in. And I realized that I was really being tested, um, really being tested to have tenacity in the face of complete unworkability. And I realized I need to continue to be in training around this, um, because I couldn't see my way out of it at all. I also know, um, and Janice and I have talked about this, that my favorite principle, give everything a place. And so when Janice and I came on and talked, it was like, boom, we gave that unworkability a place by my being able to be in conversation about it. And the rest of the day smoothed out. Um, and I I realized how important it is to really bring up, okay, these things are just not working, and to be in conversation around that. And we've said this in different ways here on our channel. We've talked about this, but I've never come up into being present to such unworkability and sadness and anger and frustration beyond um, frustration beyond what I usually experience. And so I think just in hindsight, I'll step back and say, yes, we gave unworkability a place. So that was awesome. And also gave each other and others of you out there, I'm sure you can name many, 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 many times when you've sat in a similar place, especially lately, where nothing's quite going right. Um, I don't really use the word right and wrong in my vocabulary anymore, but so I use unworkability. Um, and noticing that there's a different intensity to the spectrum of unworkability now that's new. And so, how to navigate through that. So I've got tons more to say, I'm sure, but I'll turn it over to you, Janice, and um, you to see where you're at on it.
Yes, so I concur, Liz, that I think unworkability is heightened, and I think it's going to continue to heighten for a little while. Because so much of what we've known is falling away. And that leaves us in a place of feeling like the ground is shifting beneath our feet. When I was working with Liz to share our little write-up on MailChimp and design that, I Googled the definition of tenacity. And the third definition was the one that I would say that I normally think of when I think of tenacity, which is persisting, no matter what, hanging in there. But interestingly, in terms of hanging in there, one of the other definitions they offered was holding on really firmly to something, actually gripping on to something. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because how else would you be tenacious, of course? How else are you going to keep going other than to hold to what you know to be real? I mean, when I find myself in a place of being tenacious, it's because I am operating in I am that, and where I am that is. And I'm coming from my values and my code and who I know myself to be and who I practice being. So yeah, I'm holding on to all of those things firmly so that I can do whatever is needed to do, whether it is perhaps push back against something or carve out a space for something that I think needs to be present and isn't currently present. But all of that is going to rely on us being able to operate from our core, which means that we need to know what it is for us to be anchored in that core, so that we can tap into our tenacity.
That's a really good point. I like how you said anchored into our core. And it took me right back to the tutoring situation, which was, there was in that moment. We had to sit in no solution. We had to sit in, okay, there's not agreement on any of the aspects of organization or that we brought up. There just was nowhere to go with that. And so being anchored in the value of, I'm not going to give up on this amazing human that I'm sitting with, because today she's making the choice to, you know, have Not for Life be her operating system, so to speak. Um, and so, yeah, I really like the being anchored piece. Um, and now I'll skirt around that and go, yeah, but because um because then after that situation, I can't even remember. Thank goodness I can't remember, which is great. The other situations that happened around it that just were not working. Um, but I did get to the kind of the bottom of the well, like kind of this where, yeah, I do want to give up. I just and I also know in those moments of I just want to give up. I don't want to do this anymore, go into the little tantrum that I could have. Um, that getting to the bottom of the well was kind of surprising. And then feeling, okay, where do I go now? Because I'm at the end kind of thing. I'm at the end of my rope, which I have a very long rope. So that's what I'm putting forward to others. It's like I'm seeing that being tenacious, that is very much one of the values that I hold dearly. Um, that drives everything that I am. Uh, that there is this just, plowing through. Um, I've got a chainsaw, and I'm going to use the chainsaw on the ice just to get myself through, kind of thing. That there's now there's kind of a fragility in that. It's like my chainsaw, I might need to upgrade the chain because it's getting worn. Meaning, how can I upgrade my tenacious tenaciousness in the face of what I know what I know and what I'm feeling is coming in front of us. So that was kind of this is kind of the crux of our conversation today, because it's training. Um, so where can we go with that?
And coming back to, principles that we rely on in the field of Tantra Mat, that, things like everything has a place, and this notion of both and, right? So
Mm,
Liz can be at the end of her rope and still committed to not letting go, right?
mhm,
You know, uh, the word self-care gets bandied about these days, and sort of in the mainstream world, I feel like it's kind of lost its power, but it really is for each of us to know how to be able to care for ourselves through these transitions that are upon us. And for me, that meant saying, you know what? I'm going to ignore the world for the month of December and just do Christmas, because I am a Christmas fiend. It comes once a year. I usually leave my decorations up till after Martin Luther King Day. Somehow it feels important to include that in the celebration. Um,
mm,
but I generally gave myself a pass on doing work in the world because I needed it. I was spent. Um, I was tired, um, not tired, fatigued, and I needed to let myself have a break, knowing that it was just a break, and that come the first of the year, I would be back on the path um, towards everything that I want to bring into the world. And and being able to be with our beingness, and that sometimes that beingness results in doingness, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it's, I've got to, take 2 hours and go binge watch my favorite comedy because I need to get a little laughter in my life. Or, I'm going to dissolve this relationship because it is not reciprocal and it's taking far more from me than I am getting in return. Um, or sometimes it's knowing that this relationship is never going to be reciprocal, but that's okay because I'm going to do it as part of what I feel is my work to do in the world. But I Liz and I were talking before we started the call. I think in Western cultures anyway, we've sort of been sold this bill of goods that um, that we know we're living right when we're happy and there is no unworkability, right? Everything is the way that we want it to be, and that's just not human life. I mean, we're here to learn and we're here to grow, and that means unworkability, and coming across unworkability is part of that journey. But it's how we be with unworkability that is going to, determine what we're able to learn, and how we're able to grow, and new skills and insights and everything that we develop by navigating these places of unworkability. Last year, Tantra talked quite a bit about this notion of the emotional palette. And and to me, that is recognizing the full, vast, deep spectrum of human emotion, and recognizing that you can feel more than one things at once, feel more than one thing at once. I am an actor, and one of the things that I've learned in my craft is that the most interesting portrayal of a character is a layered portrayal, and that it's more interesting for the audience to watch an actor juggling a couple of different emotions at once than to watch them just be happy or just be sad. Or so it's important to recognize that we can feel multiple things at once. It's also important to recognize that feelings are feelings as opposed to moods. In other words, feelings are generally of limited duration. And they're designed to move through us. Emotion, right? Energy in motion. So that we can hold multiple things at once, and we can also choose whether we want to stay in a certain place, working with a certain thing, ruminating over something, um, obsessing over something, as I am sometimes prone to do, or if we're willing to say, okay, that happened. When I look at it, it's pointing to this, principle that I really care about, or this commitment that I've made to who I be as creation, and I'm going to move in that direction. Possibly after having a good old temper tantrum about something, right? So it's how can we allow ourselves to be experiencing all the things that we experience as a human being and still be tenacious in our commitment to how we show up in the world, big picture.
Yeah. Uh, Yeah, I love that. And one of the hows is what we're doing right now. So, for those of you watching, you're with us, and I welcome anyone to leave comments and ask questions. Um, because you're sitting with us in the living room here. We're having this conversation together. And that's one of the things we can turn to is being with another, um, whether it be with one or more. Uh, One of the things I'm kind of is in the background that I spoke with Janice about was there's this young man who is in recovery from addiction, and he's an amazing light in the world. And he came on Instagram the other day, and that was being with another in the field. It was on the same day that the all these situations occurred, and he was talking about happiness, so and what does that mean, finding happiness, which is what Janice just spoke to. But that was being with another in the field, and he literally comes on Instagram and says, "Stop, wait, come, take my hands." And so for me, that's such a gift uh, that we can each be in this huge spectrum. Because when you talked about the complexity of feelings, I can see a spectrum of tenacity, and I love spectrums of any kind because they do give me such choice. I mean, I'm sure we could tease out 100 different colors of tenacity and rate them each, 100 different nuances of tenacity to play with. Uh, and so being with others, it's so important. And in my conversations this week, I do see that we're still struggling, even those of us in our community feeling that, well, I got to handle this myself. And I had that same feeling before I talked with you. It was like I didn't know where to turn. Even I was telling my partner, but I knew that he was just letting me kind of talk it out because that's how we roll. And then sometimes he'll make comments. And in this case, it was more I just needed to get it out, get all that unworkability out, and there wasn't really an exchange. So uh, I think it's really, really, really important that these big feelings that we're having and will continue to have, because I think the spectrum of feelings is going to become greater this year, and intense feelings that we really um, have courage to be with others around it and to be in collaborations, no matter what they are. Um, Even if it's in the pity party and the pity circle or whatever in the moment, that's important for us to turn to each other. So I don't know if you have anything around that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the things that often sparks or activates, that's the word I want, activates my tenacity is anger about something. Um I spent 35 years in the public school system. I was a high school teacher for about 20 years. And also then spent basically the second half of my career working as an instructional coach where I was supporting other teachers and helping them, try new things and learn new skills. And in the latter part, in that instructional coaching time period, I found myself often in situations where I was working with high level leadership in school districts. Um, and I could get very frustrated at what I saw was a disconnect between their understanding of reality and what teachers and students were actually experiencing in classrooms. And encountered what I like to call teacher hating frequently. It was everything was the teacher's fault. Everything was the teacher, everything. And it's like, that's not okay. And not only is it not fair and demoralizing for teachers, but it wasn't solving the problems because it wasn't an accurate assessment of what was going on. And so that would often activate my up, this I will no longer put. And, I really often found myself in the place of having to defend teachers or saying, have you actually asked them these questions? When was the last time you went in and observed when, and, it would be things like, well, we need to have this planning meeting, and the teachers really needed to have a voice in that planning meeting, but there was all these reasons why it wasn't possible to schedule a meeting at a time that teachers would be available. And it's like, that was hogwash. It's hogwash. There might not have been a convenient time to schedule the meeting when the teachers were available, but there were absolutely times and ways in which, and they would tell me, well, we can't do that. And I would say, you have to. The stipulation of the grant, which wasn't true, but I said it anyway because it needed to happen. It was my stipulation of my participation with the grant. Teachers were going to have a voice, gosh darn it, whether that was convenient or not. But I couldn't just come from anger, right? If I just came from anger, then I would have just yelled and screamed and maybe, turned a table over and stormed out of a room and nothing would have progressed. So I had to recognize that my anger was activating deeply held beliefs, which is that teachers needed to have a voice. And then I needed to be able to tap into other aspects. I needed to be able to tap into my compassion for the administrators and why they felt the way that they felt. And how could I, get on the same page with them so that we could come up with solutions that, were then plausible. Yeah, so it's very much this needing to navigate and be in both and to recognize that again, that feelings are meant to tell you something. And if we can just listen to them and honor them, we can usually gather the wisdom that we need to move forward. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's coming up in the chat, so let me just share some things. Talking about others feeling like they have to do it on their own as well, and not necessarily getting support from parents. And then mentioning that both in 2023 and 2024, that in the prophetics, it became clear that our emotions and their health would be the through line for what we're going through now. And back to this notion of, needing to know who is taking care of us. And when we don't have others doing that, how are we going to be doing that ourselves? And how can we do it in ways that are life enhancing rather than life defeating? And yeah, it's absolutely something that we're all training in, I think. And that,
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
go ahead, and that the importance of not letting everything that's gonna happen, has happened and is gonna happen, take us down. And because we need to stay standing in this time.
So what I heard in your speaking, what I'm present to is I use this analogy so many times. I had sat with another student and was helping her do a simulation. It was so cool in science. And it was all about an ecosystem and what happens to an ecosystem over time. And what I learned that somehow I didn't really think about, that I picked up as a student myself growing up, was that no matter how many imbalances there are in that ecosystem, this animal could go extinct, or there could be a fire in the area and all the grass burns, and so the animals that live in that ecosystem then leave that ecosystem for some time, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's all of these things that happen, and you can apply that to our lives, that all these imbalances happen. But what happens, it always goes back to a 0 point and a balance point over time. And so what I felt as you were speaking, because I I can really resonate with what you're saying because I held a similar position in my own school district that I worked with. And at the end of my career was always in a position where it was a daily negotiation, whether I was negotiating with a student over how they were learning and what they were learning, or a teacher trying to work with the teacher, or my administrator, or the administration at the district office. Um, Same thing, all of these different balance points, things going out of balance. And what I came to in my mind as you were speaking was sitting with that student. And where did it come to? It came to a balance point for me at the end of the session where I did say to her, you know, you are so smart and so very capable. And this is just a moment in time. And so I came back to love. And yep, that's corny. You know, I mean, we go, it's cheesy, but that's what it came to. Love for another human being, love for sitting in the, you know, the I'm not gonna give up. Um, Love for the energy that it created. Granted, she went off and of course was nervous when she went off because she had to go look for her science notebook that she needed for class that day. But yet, you know, we came to that balance point and so how do we do that for ourselves? How do we do that for ourselves? Because in any given moment, we may not have that other person to bounce off of. And so, how do we build that inner strength um, and to come to our own balance point? Uh, and so, I loved what you said about self care. And again, we've talked about this ad nauseum of like, okay, well, what do we do when we're in that moment? And I do similar to what you said. Um, the the other one that really has been serving me lately that's kind of new to me is that going outside, just going outside my door and right now feeling the crisp air and being in nature um, soothes my system, you know, calms. It's like a fever, right? You know, if you take a cold drink of water, it kind of calms the fever for a few moments. Um, and and if in these moments we don't have someone that we can turn to, that we start to make. I'm a list maker. Um, make a list for ourselves. Well, what can I do to self soothe in these moments? What can I do uh, so that I can bring myself back to um, a place of hope. I go to a place of hope because there have been some feelings of hopelessness lately, and I know that we're probably going to be going to more of that emotion. Um, and so, what can I do for myself that will soothe myself in these moments when I know that I'm feeling really hopeless? And so, I think number one for me, and it's taken me time to get there, is that I'm enough and that I actually am this huge bouquet of emotions that are incredible. Um, and and um, that I have the strength, stamina, and capacity to move myself through this. Um, and the other thing that helps me is I'm a musician, so I go right to music and I go also, and that really that'll kick start me out of any spectrum of um, frustration, anger, hopelessness. And for me, I pick an orchestral piece because I love the blending of the frequency and the tones, and those pure tones can, when they enter your system, they can balance out the imbalances that the energy is running in our systems. Uh, so you guys, many of you have probably seen where someone puts sand on a plate and then they vibrate it with music, and how the sand becomes this amazing design, sacred geometry design that just blows you away. It blows me away every time. Well, that happens in our system too when we play music. So that would be one place to go, even if you're not prone to going to music. Um, there is something in that, really something in that. I had a student yesterday. I was kind of blown away. He's a little fourth grade guy. Um, Interestingly, he goes to a Christian school, and he was talking about music, and he said, I have this rap piece that's just going through my head and I can't get it out of my head. He tends that way, he becomes obsessed with things. And and he played it for me. And rap is my least favorite genre of music, but then he started singing it, and I was just floored. This was a newer rap artist who actually sings rap more slowly, which is, I said, well, why are you drawn to this? It's fascinating. This young man rapper is no longer on the planet. Um, and this kid loves this music. He said, well, because it's slow and I can really hear. Um, I brought in the word lyrics. So he said, I can really hear the lyrics. And I noticed that my student's body started to regulate as he was singing this rap piece, which actually moved more slowly. It was fascinating, fascinating. And then the student's dad goes, he was singing that thing before bed and he was screaming it. It was driving me crazy. And he goes, and then the next second, he was out like a light, cracking up. And that's because his system got regulated, right? And it calmed his system. And this particular rap piece was not what, we would ordinarily think about rap. It was more, had kind of a lullaby to it in a way, and it had this calming beat to it that, yeah, it would put you to sleep eventually. So it just was fascinating to me to watch the system regulate around these frequencies. Um, so that's something I go back to. Uh, is self-soothing with music and frequency.
Right, because we are energetic slash electrical beings. I mean, that's how all of our system functions. When somebody has a heart attack and they're being revived with those paddles, that it's electricity that's being used to jumpstart them. People who have pacemakers, it's electricity that's helping to regulate the beat of the heart. Um, so music has its own electricity and its own resonance. And so absolutely it's part of what can help reset us. I mean, it's no mystery that every culture has music, right? I mean, that is a fundamental human experience.
Yeah,
And it's one of those things that evolved with us very, very early on. Um, and it's not isolated to humans either, right? There are plenty of species that have their own music. Um, but I think you bring up a really important point, Liz, of being willing to be sort of really expanded in our view of what can help us, regulate. Because to me, that regulation point, getting to that balance point, is a key piece of this notion of tenacity, right? I mean, and if we're gonna, think about a runner prepping to run the race, and they go down on those blocks, and they get themselves in a balance point, but they're also and this is I'm gonna geek out a minute scientifically, but it's this idea of potential versus kinetic energy, right? They're putting their body in a particular shape that is gonna allow them to access the potential energy, stored energy, and turn it into the kinetic energy, the energy of movement, when the starter pistol goes off and it's time for them to run. Um, and we have to have that same understanding of how we function. We have to figure out what our blocks are, and I mean our starting blocks, and what what are the things that we do in our life that position us, that help us get that potential energy, so that when it's time to move, when it is time to do, that we can access that and move forward. And that is, to me, that is what tenacity is all about, is recognizing that, there's a time for rest and there's a time for action, the time to, sort of be noodling about things, and a time to actually put things into play. Um, and recognizing that those are all part of the process, and that rest, for instance, isn't a guilty pleasure we allow ourselves. It's necessary for life. I mean, people who can't sleep die. So I mean, rest has a biological function as well as an emotional function. Um, and what are all the different ways that rest can look for you? And what are all the different ways that coming into balance can look for you? Music is a great one for me, but and I also I'm a performer, so I love to perform. I'm when I'm done performing, it's every bit of 3 hours before I can begin to come down from the energy that's been generated by performing. Um, is it a walk in the woods? Is it, a couple of chapters of your favorite book? Is it some silly TV show? There's no right and wrong in any of that. Because, Liz was saying earlier, we could probably paint, at least 100 different colors of tenacity, right? I mean, tenacity is going to be unique to each of us. It's going to have its own flavor and its own color. And so then what we need to access our own tenacity is going to be unique to us as well, knowing that there are some general patterns that tend to work for everybody: nature, music, art of any kind, really. Connecting, being with another in the field. These are all things that have been part of the human experience as long as humans have been humans. And so I think there's also a lot of value into looking, I always say, if you really have a big question, look at indigenous peoples and how they do things. Because theirs is a wisdom that has persisted across time. Can't say that of every culture that's occupied our planet. And again, the critical need to give ourselves space for all of this, and to recognize that, again, especially those of us who've been raised in Western cultures, have been raised with in many ways very limited definitions of limited definitions of happiness, limited definitions of doing this, limited definitions of being this. And we are really, I think, in this time being pushed to expand, which is one of my words for the year, expansion, to expand our understanding so that we can be compassionate with ourselves, so that we can be compassionate for others. we in the United States, we are in a situation of incredible political polarity, like incredible political polarity. And yet things happen like all the hurricanes that we had in Florida back in October, like all the wildfires that are happening in Los Angeles right now. Things happen that that can bring us together. It can sort of break us out of that polarity and bring us back together. And I also feel that part of what's going to be critical as we move forward and because I think what's going to happen is that as political systems crumble, I think some of the polarity will naturally go with it. And then there's going to be two people standing on opposite side of a line looking at each other. And what now? Compassion and connection and the willingness to listen to each other. Um, I think I think opening our minds and opening our hearts is a lot of what is on the table as well. Um, and that to me is part of tenacity too. Um, because when you shut out and when you shut down, then you are removing some of what could help you move forward in tenacity. So open hearts, open minds, and a willingness to not know, a willingness to not have the answers. I think those are also critical pieces of tenacity.
Yeah, tenacities, we've been talking a lot in the field of Tantra Mod about ethers. Tenacity is an ether. And so I put the question to our viewers also. So what does that look like for you? I've heard many people talk about my drive, okay, my driver, which is this tenacious Wonder Woman kind of being that I came in with, and I'm so grateful to her. Um, and so what does that look like for you as an ether? Because I've heard so many people say, I just don't have that. I don't have that drive. And that's not true. We all have it. Some of us, along the spectrum, maybe have a little bit more of it. Maybe a little more was dumped in when we came onto the planet. I don't know. Um, but just to look at, well, what does that? I see energy as threads, like ropes. What does that thread of tenacity look like for you? It's a curiosity of mine. One of my other phrases for the year is um, I'm crediting Dr. Joe Dispenza is immersive curiosity. Like he gets into a subject and just goes just overboard with it, which is part of tenacity. It's part of that thread. Um, and so looking at it from that perspective, well, what are you curious enough about in your life that you just really want to do research on it? Like you looked up the word tenacity. I didn't even think to do that. Um, what are you so curious about? Well, that's tenacity, really, that you're willing to go out and find out everything you can about it. We all have that. We all have that. That's one of the I think the beauties about our being human, and we have that the ether of tenacity uniquely. And so I'd be curious to hear from others. Well, what does that look like for you? Uh, just because I think it would be. I also think in color, so it'd be this beautiful, colorful spectrum of. Okay, well, these are ways that I could say I'm obsessive about life, on the planet, because to me, immersive is up to it can border on obsessive sometimes. Um, what interests you? That's tenacity. What interests you to a point that you can't not be with be with that? That's your driver. That's tenacity. And so going to that place in these moments when we're looking at life and just very frustrated with where we see things going, to go to that place of, well, what what in life do I just love, or what in life do I really want to learn about right now? Um, Going to that place, we talked about music, but whatever topic, whatever topic that might be for you, um, could be a scientific topic. I know that um, after being at a retreat of Dr. Joe's, I got really interested in the chemicals in our brain, and so I went and I looked at the chemical makeup and these beautiful configurations of chemistry that are in our brain, and I was just like, wow, that's really cool. And so that's another way of, you could call that a distraction, but it's not. I mean, it's part of us being human and going to these places that are of deep interest to us. And then in that way, it becomes part of who we are, but also part of um, what we can be with when we're in these moments of unworkability.
Yeah, we have a comment that was shared in the chat, to just keep going, to be my wholeness out of my brokenness, and then see what's there.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. And again,
Mhm.
that's available to all of us. Um, and and I think it's also helpful at these times, as we're seeking our balance points, as we're looking for what allows us to recover, is to also be able to gain some perspective about conditioning that we've been raised with, and this notion of what is it to be weak and what is it to be strong, right? All of these dualities that have been programmed into us. Um, Many of which we may not want to continue embracing. So to me, part of tenacity also is looking at what do I want to say is, you know, what do I hold to be true, and what has somebody told me that I may benefit from releasing, so that there is room for a different perspective. Um, Somebody's just sharing in a chat that they're tenacious about creating a deeper understanding of equus and real communication and knowing with horses. Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing that can move you, right? When you're in a place of something feels unworkable, then you go and you commune with the horses. For me, it's communing with the dolphins and the whales, um, and the trees, and nature in general. Um, but again, there are plenty of people out there that would say, oh, trees don't talk. You can't talk to a tree. Well, I suppose that depends on what your definition of talk is, right? I mean, that's, this notion of, you know, nature as separate from us and somehow less worthy than human beings. That's programming that I choose to release. I do not choose to engage in that programming. I find things being, everything in nature is my kin for me. And so that's part of what we're at work about in this time as well. And in finding our tenacity, we we want to explore what we hold to be true for us, what we hold to be real, because we get to make those choices.
Yeah, I love that. You brought back a memory. I I was on the play yard at recess in my teaching job, and we have these beautiful ash trees. They're huge, and the kids like to go and play among the roots. And there's this one kid stomping on the roots, and my heart just, I almost started crying. And I went up to the kid and I go, please don't stomp on that. I said, it's like your arm. What if I stomped on your arm? And the kid was like, yes. It hadn't even occurred to him that was what it was like. That's a funny memory, but it just really hurt me when, I mean, literally was not being nice about it. It wasn't like he was playing. He was literally stomping on the root like he knew what he was doing in a way. So um, yeah, definitely. I got derailed by that memory. Uh, but that's so important, right? Um, Knowing that we are, let's see, I froze for a minute. Hopefully I'm coming back.
No, you're good.
Okay, good. All right. Um, yeah, knowing what really, really matters to us, and that we are connected, um, we are connected in with nature, and the air around us speaks even. Okay,
And reality
I'm
is
gonna go over to you.
reality is co-created, which means,
Yeah.
we get to have a say in what's happening around us. I mean, doesn't mean we have control over everything, but we have say. And I think we're entering a period of time where there are human beings who are going to work really hard to convince other human beings that they don't have say, that they don't have power, that there is only to be subservient, to give in. Um, and that has never been true about humanity. So it's a time for us to dig deep, find our core, connect to what really matters to us, and know and be able to say what really matters to us. What are we for? One of my favorite quotes from Mother Teresa is she was invited to attend an anti-war protest. And she said, I don't have an interest in attending an anti-war protest, but when you hold a peace rally, then please invite me. So, what are we for in these times? That's a critical place for us to be.
Yeah, and that's tenacity. That's our driver. Those are the our own principles that drive us. Um, I'm for humans uh, being recognized as humans, not necessarily male versus female. I'm a human before I'm a female. So treating humanity respectfully, I'm for that. No matter, man, woman, child, he, she, they, uh, it, animals, it, plants. Uh, so that's what I'm standing in. I am worth it. I'm worth being here. And so are all of you. We all are. Yeah. Any last things for you?
I suspect that we'll be continuing this conversation, so
Yeah.
might want to check back next week where we may be riffing on this same idea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, you can continue the conversation on the Create a World Facebook page. That's an opportunity if something occurs to you after the podcast or today that you really want to share. That's a place that you can be in conversation with us. And we thank you so much for being here with us because you are part of the field that creates these conversations. And we will look forward to being with you next Friday, same time, same place. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you.